Hi, my name's Larry Osrin. I was 19 years old at the time when the war, before it broke out. 2 weeks before the war broke out, we got word that they were looking for people to come and take the place of soldiers in Israel, in the kibbutzim, to free them up so that the kibbutzim could still operate and there'd be enough people to man the war. And it was quite an exciting time. I had a history of driving. My father had a scrapyard, so I used to be able to drive big trucks. I quickly went and took my heavy-duty license, which made my trip in Israel quite exciting because I was able to drive around as a driver, and I was able to plow and to do some out-of-the-ordinary stuff. We were one of the first people to go. We left on the second day. We arrived on the third day of the war. The war was still on. We were very surprised when it was over in 3 days' time. But still, I would say it's still one of the highlights of my life. I stayed on for about 6 to 8 months after the war broke out. Well, I had a history with the Zionist Fed before because I was one of the they had an experimental school in the Shomron called Alonei Yitzchak, where they were mixing kids from South Africa, from South America, and Samarim and Israelis. And at that time, I was a little bit naughty. My folks wanted to send me to boarding school, and that didn't appeal to me. And they came up with this idea: how about a boarding school in Israel? And the Zionist Fed, had also put the word out that they were looking for people for this experiment of mixing kids to see how they would assimilate. And I went when I was 14 years old to Israel it was supposed to be for the rest of my schooling, but I came back for my brother's wedding, and I didn't go back after that because my mum didn't let me. She didn't realize that the Israeli year starts in September, and she thought I'd missed out a whole year because I'd left in January. But I was on Ulpan, so I had learned to speak Hebrew, which was another great advantage for me when I got to being a volunteer. So my Hebrew wasn't brilliant, but I could understand well, and I could speak quite fluently. So when the word got out that Israel was under attack and that they were being surrounded on three fronts, I and a few friends found ourselves at the Fed, and we volunteered, and they were very organized. The whole thing was a very amazing experience. We got word of it through networking. I'm not sure if there was any sort of formal ad, but I just know that my mother, who was quite a networker herself, she got word from other people who said that people are needed to go to Israel to help free up kibbutzniks. That's where they targeted. I suppose that because they could accommodate them easily without having to make all sorts of arrangements. But the word got out, and one led to the other, and people let know, have you got any youngsters who are free enough to go? Israel, during and after the war, was an absolutely amazing place where people forgot about their arguments and things. You walked through the streets and you could hear the news. The people in the homes put the volume of the radios up so that people on the streets could hear what was going on. There was an incredible unity amongst the people. So the Ruach, the spirit, was one of, we're doing this together. And that was an incredible thing. And then, of course, the excitement of all these volunteers coming from all over the world. Well, I think there were 5 or 6 main countries that they came from. I think something like 5,000 volunteers came from all over in a very short space of time. Because obviously, I think most of them arrived after the war. And the Jewish Agency and the Fed made a thing of it, made an Aliyah program of it, which was very successful, because I think a lot of people who came during that time stayed or came back. So once it was in motion, they didn't stop because the war stopped and said, okay, let's relax now. They carried on and let people come. And volunteers kept coming even though the war was over. As far as making relationships with the South Africans and others is concerned, sadly not. I haven't really maintained, except I've got one friend here who lives in the area, Joey Hillovitz, who I see from time to time, and another friend who also lived nearby, Stanley Hafer, who's late. But we did make friends. We assimilated very well with people from other places and the Israelis themselves. We became close, but unfortunately after we'd left, there wasn't much contact after that. I have been back to the kibbutz once, and a few of the older folk are there. It's completely changed. It used to be, you know, in those days it was much more young, and these days it's run mostly on the only young people you see are volunteers. All the young Israelis go off to seek their fortune, and it was just the older folk who were left. When we arrived, we were taken to like absorption centers for a day or two, and before they decided who was going where, and before they allocated us to kibbutzim. And then once we got to the kibbutz, you know, we went into the fields. I remember having to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and we just simply used to go to bed with our work clothes on. So that when the beep beep came, we just grab our boots, go back and sit in the back of the car and of the van and fall asleep again, because they still had to pick up everyone from all around. So it used to take 20, 30 minutes to gather up the people who are going to work in the fields. So we used to virtually sleepwalk to the car, grabbing our boots, and then wake up when we got to work, which was often quite far from the living quarters. The fields were far. But it was simple work. It was either picking, or it was weeding, or it was, you know, it was not something that you needed a lot of training for. My being a truck driver turned out to be quite a boon for me, and made my time there very different to most, for 2 reasons. The one is because I had my heavy duty license. I was allowed to do some plowing, number one, which was possibly the most fulfilling experience I've ever had in my life. Because I arrived in the morning, and the Sidran Avodah, the man who gave us our work, said, I want you to plow from there and go as far as you can. And the whole landscape was a dirty grey. And I got onto this huge D8, which had a span of about 4 meters of plows. And I sat and I plowed up and down about 1 kilometer each thing. By the end of the day, the landscape had changed from light grey to dark brown. And he came and he just looked at it, he said, Asita Avodah Yofa, you've done good work. And I knew I had. It was just an amazing experience. So that was a highlight for me. And the other thing was that we had about 70 volunteers on our kibbutz. And it was a treat for as many who could fit in the tender, the van, which was about 12 people, 14 people, to go. We weren't far from Tel Aviv. So we were allowed a break, an evening out in Tel Aviv once a month. So if you take 70 people, you divide by 2, so six times a month, they needed a driver to take them into Tel Aviv. They started out with the kibbutz driver, but as soon as he saw how proficient I was at driving, I became the driver. So I had a hell of a party, going with 6 different lots of volunteers, 12 at a time, into Tel Aviv for a jawl. So that really was and it also got me to know the roads. It also got me to know Tel Aviv quite well, because they all wanted to go to different places, which I had to. We didn't have Google Maps. We had to find our way around. So that was quite a fine experience as well. Tel Aviv, during the war, was an exciting place. As I said, people were on the streets, and people were aware that people were on the streets, and they were wanting to share with them the Chadashot, the news. So everywhere you walked, you heard the songs that were playing, the songs of the war. The Yerushalayim of Shel Zahav was on all the time, and whenever the news came on, people put the volume up. People were walking. There was a lot of street life. There was an incredible spirit in Tel Aviv. It was very, very celebratory. It was like every night was like a party, you know. And of course, when we came in as volunteers, the Israelis were very grateful, and they were very hospitable. They're not always, but during that time, they were incredibly hospitable, and they were very keen to show their gratitude that we had moved out of our lives to come and be at their side, and they showed that. My knowledge of Hebrew has stood me in great stead because of that, and obviously when I went off to Tel Aviv with these crowds of people to party, I was the translator, and on the kibbutz itself, the kibbutzniks, the English wasn't as good as it is today. I mean, everybody in Israel can speak English today, but in those days not everyone could. So I became like the interpreter and the middleman between the volunteers and the giving out of work. So that led to my being nominated. They had a get-together of representatives from all the volunteers from all the kibbutzim, and we went to the Israeli president's home, where he thanked us and gave us messages to take back to thank all the volunteers for coming. This was after about 6 months. The experience of being in Israel wasn't too life-changing for me, because I'd been there before. I'd been there 5 or 6 years before, and that was my life-changing experience. The changes that people went through, like my girlfriend arrived a few months after with her girlfriend, and they were all very fashionable with false eyelashes and makeup, etc. And they were, within a day or two, they were in the fields, and I mean, the kibbutzniks were looking at them and laughing. But within a few days they adapted, and the makeup came off and they fitted in, and the whole focus changes, and your way of entertainment changes. Here you entertain yourselves, you sit around campfires singing, you sit in people's rooms, all having a chat, or a lot of singing. After the war, I came back, and I was going to start at university, and going to Israel sort of changed my focus. I no longer went to WITS. I now applied to go to UCT, and which is what I did. I went and did a course in social science. Coming back was, it was an anticlimax. It was sad. You knew that you just had one of the best periods of your life, and it had come to an end. Unfortunately, there was no kind of structure to keep us all together. So after the war, it was a feeling of disappointment. No, we felt very gratified that we went. I think everybody who went as a volunteer, even though you might have only picked cotton or picked avocados or worked with the chickens, it was still felt it was a worthwhile experience. I don't think that anybody thought it was a waste of time. And there was a sadness that came when it was all over. One almost wished it could carry on. And for some it did. For some they carried on. They made Aliyah and they stayed on, whilst they came home and they made plans to go back. Quite a few people that I know of did that. One just has to take the hat off to Israel, the way that they have coped with being surrounded by enemy or people who are hostile to them. The technology of it, the modernness of it. For me, being a Jew and being Israeli, having Israel there, has always been a safety net. I think the great thing is that if ever we need to, for whatever circumstance happens, Israel is there to catch us like a safety net. And therefore I've always supported it as a state, and hats off to them. Hats off to I'm proud to be a part of them.